And welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us at the Wyoming Community Foundation for Endowments 101. We're so excited that you could be here today, and to be respectful of y'all's time, we're going to jump right in and get started. So I just want to start with some brief introductions of the folks who are on the webinar today. I'm Jerica Becken. I'm the Director of Philanthropy here at the Wyoming Community Foundation. And my co-presenter is Sarah Chapman, our illustrious COO. Also joining us today, although she's having some technical issues, so she'll be jumping in a little bit late, is our Chief Financial Officer, Misty Gailey. I'd also like to give a shout out to Helga Benjamin, who is running things behind the scenes for us today. And we are also joined by Madeline Zimmer, our Associate Director of Philanthropy, who is our backup questions person. We're very prepared today. So thank you so much for joining us. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Please, if you have questions throughout the webinar, we want to hear them, but please use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. We'll be using the chat box for any group updates, any links that need to be shared, anything like that. So make sure that you are asking us questions, but use that chat box. Both Misty and Madeline will be monitoring that for us. The webinar is being recorded, so if you want to share this later on with board members or staff, we will be able to send that out. We'll be sending it out in a follow-up email that will also include a survey that we would really love for you to fill out. So please take a few minutes. It should be short and sweet, but this gives us really great feedback as to how to adjust this program in the future, any other educational opportunities you're looking for, that kind of thing. And that's also where we'll announce our 2 winners of our $500 grant giveaways today. So we will get you notified pretty quickly. That email should be going out maybe Wednesday afternoon, Thursday. Okay, so a quick agenda for today. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about who we are at the Wyoming Community Foundation, who our partners are. I'll hand it off to Sarah to get started on what is an endowment anyway, which is what y'all are here for. And then we'll get a little bit more into what it looks like to establish a fund at the Community Foundation and the agency fund services that we offer. So, Wyoming Community Foundation in a nutshell, we also are a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We're based in Laramie with staff all over the place. We have staff in Casper, Cheyenne, Lander, Riverton, and Sheridan. And we are really excited to be celebrating 35 years in business this year. So 35 years serving Wyoming nonprofits and working with wonderful partners like yourselves. Our main mission is connecting people who care with causes that matter to build a better Wyoming. And you may have heard that phrase before. What does that really mean? We're managing and distributing charitable funds for Wyoming. That includes on the nonprofit side, that includes on the donor side. So we are really committed to growing philanthropy in the state of Wyoming and being kind of a partner in philanthropy. We hold over 400 funds here at WYCF, including 140 agency funds. So this really is our bread and butter. It is our focus. We want to partner with nonprofits and help provide sustainable, lasting funding. We've granted over 100 million since inception and made over 10,000 grants. So we're really excited to be in the nonprofit space and supporting such wonderful organizations as yourself. And before I hand it over to Sarah, I just want to I forgot our partners. So I do want to take a quick minute to spotlight some of our partners. We are the umbrella organization for the Wyoming After School Alliance, which focuses on out-of-school time for youth in Wyoming. We oversee the Wyoming Wildlife Foundation. There we go. That really focuses on preserving spaces, habitat, wildlife in Wyoming. And then, of course, the Wyoming Women's Foundation, which focuses on opportunities for women and girls in Wyoming. We also have 6 local boards that operate throughout the state, including Casper, Dubois-Crowheart area, Evanston, Sheridan-Johnson counties, Sweetwater, and Sublette counties. And these volunteers are really important to us as they help make recommendations on grants for their area, build assets in their communities, and really support the work of the Community Foundation statewide. And at any point in time, we have anywhere between 150 and 200 volunteers operating across the state. So we're really grateful to all of the people who are connected to our work and who are promoting the mission of the Community Foundation in so many wonderful ways. And now, before I hand it off to Sarah, I do want to spotlight some of the agency funds that we have across the state. As I said, we have over 140, so you might see things from every corner of Wyoming, and we're just so pleased to be able to offer this service and partner with our nonprofit organizations in our state. So I'm going to hand it off to Sarah now.
Thank you, Jerica. Hi, everyone. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of endowments and just generally talk about endowments and how they can benefit organizations. And we'll talk a little bit later about endowments at the Wyoming Community Foundation specifically. So what is an endowment? Anyway, it's an invested institutional fund, and it regularly distributes investment income to support your nonprofit organization. And so you can think of it as a long-term invested fund held somewhere that benefits your organization. And those payouts are usually, they might be annually, they could be semi-annually. Don't often see them more frequently than that. You might see quarterly, depending where the endowment is held, but you know, the idea is that you are getting a consistent, reliable source of funding that you can, you know, account for and plan around. And the sort of key component is that these funds are invested for perpetuity. This is meant to be a forever fund. And so as a result of that, the full balance of the fund is not fully expendable. So there's a portion of the fund that will always be invested and untouchable to you. And, you know, just like any invested fund that you might see, these are funds that react to market conditions. And so, you know, your fund will see some gains and losses, just like any invested fund would, but with the idea that you're investing this for perpetuity with a forever time horizon, you can really work to balance out this volatility over time. Endowments can be set up in a variety of ways. We'll touch on a few of those coming up, but they can be, you know, set up as a trust or a private foundation or a public foundation. Or a public charity, or set up within a public charity, like at the Wyoming Community Foundation. Lastly, but probably most importantly, endowments are regulated under Wyoming MIFA, which we'll chat about in just a little bit. But that is really what helps guide appropriate endowment management. And we just wanted to mention that, you know, the Wyoming Community Foundation does not only hold endowments for nonprofit organizations, but we use one to fuel our own work. And that is why we feel like they are so valuable and so important to nonprofits. We get about 10%, 8 to 10% per year of our annual operating budget as a distribution from our own operating endowment. So we not only hold them for other organizations, but we are the beneficiaries of one ourselves. And that's exactly why we feel like they're such a valuable resource for our nonprofit community. So endowments are characterized really by the policies that govern them. And these 3 policies are the most important as it relates to your endowment. And so every endowment should have an investment policy. This is the policy that explains the investments that the endowment, you know, the manager of the endowment is allowed to make. And they have different investment policies that operate within a legal framework to ensure that the organization that administers the fund is doing so in a way that not only supports the operations or, you know, the ongoing work of the nonprofit, but also is administering the fund so that it can grow and be around for the long term. There's also a withdrawal policy, or often called a spending policy, and that is the outlining of how frequently and how much can be taken away from the endowment, fund on a regular basis. Organizations really determine this policy. It could be based on organizational need. It could be based on the amount of the endowment. It can be based on a variety of factors, but generally, endowments will have an annual limit for withdrawal, and this is usually pretty low because the whole purpose of an endowment is to have it grow over time and last forever. So if you're spending pretty rapidly from the fund, you will likely not have it forever. At the Community Foundation, our spending policy is 4%. We calculate this by averaging the fund balance at the end of each quarter for 20 rolling quarters. That's a period of 5 years. And we'll talk a bit more about that later, but just as an example, that's our spending policy. An organization should also have a usage policy. The usage policy is really what organizations, describes what they can use the funds for. And it just makes sure that the funds are always used in the most appropriate manner. Optimally, funds would be unrestricted and left to the leadership of the organization to determine where the funds should go and what is maybe the most immediate need to use the funds. But every now and then they are restricted. And so, for example, you may have a donor who wants to set up a fund for the Wyoming Symphony Orchestra, but their preference for funding might be to support musicians' salaries. Or you might have, a hospice organization that has funding restricted to support volunteer programs. So there are, every now and then you do see endowments that are restricted either by the donor themselves or by the organization in terms of what they want to use the funding for in an ongoing manner. But having them be unrestricted provides the most flexibility to your organization. And it's just one important note that these, like I said, these policies are very important, but a benefit of having a fund at the Wyoming Community Foundation is that you don't have to create these policies yourself. These all funds at the Wyoming Community Foundation fall under our policies. So that really reduces the burden and legal responsibility of your, board and staff in terms of managing it when it comes to your endowed funds. So as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about UPMIFA, and that stands for the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. And in 2009, Wyoming passed this as a state law, and it oversees endowed funds. So it's really important for you as an organization and also your board to be aware of this law and what it says. And in a nutshell, it provides guidance on investment decisions and endowment expenditures for funds that benefit nonprofits or charitable organizations. And basically it goes so far as to say that those investment and expenditure decisions must be prudent. You cannot be overly risky in the investment ventures that you make or the distributions that you take so that the fund would be depleted and not exist in perpetuity. And it just helps ensure that both the investment strategy and the spending or distribution amount stay at levels which ensure the fund will preserve the principal over time, but also allow the fund to grow. So it's just an important law that your board really should consider, and you as staff need to be aware of when you're making investment decisions or decisions about where you should have an endowed fund. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jerica.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So how can an endowment support your organization? Endowments can do a number of things for your agency. The first one that we like to talk about is stability and sustainability. So an endowment provides stability and increases the sustainability of your organization over time. These are funds that are designated to support your mission now and far into the future. So being there for you in perpetuity. The next one is diversification of revenue streams. So this means, as you're looking at your fundraising plan, having a variety of resources that you can rely on. So when overall your budget, having a diverse mix of revenue streams is really optimal for your organization. And we all know that in Wyoming, our nonprofits are overly reliant on grant funding from state and federal grants and from foundation funding. So adding an endowment to your revenue mix can really help you ride out unexpected changes or challenges from other funding sources. It can help you address unforeseen circumstances for your organization or cover those costs that just kind of pop up. You're like, oh no, what do we do now? An endowment. So having that diversification in your budget can be incredibly valuable. The next thing we talk about is the value of discipline. So an endowment demonstrates a disciplined and long-term commitment to your mission, which is really valuable for your board. It's valuable to your constituents, and it's valuable to your donors. So, and your staff, of course, too. So having that demonstration that you're committed to your work over time and that you're investing in the future of the organization and planning to be around for the long haul is really important. The most important ingredient in an endowment is time. We call it the magic ingredient. An endowment demonstrates commitment, again, to your mission, and 4% or whatever you decide for your prudent spending policy determines, your payout each year. It may not sound like very much at first. Certainly, if you have just like $100,000 gift or a $10,000 gift, which is the minimum at the community foundation, using that $100,000 example, receiving only about $4,000 next year might not seem like a wise decision at first. However, if you add in the ingredient of time and you take that longer view, 4% over 20 years can be transformational for your organization and can have a really incredible impact. So I want to provide a couple of visual examples of endowment, and this is just kind of a general model of what an endowed fund, a true endowed fund, looks like. And we'll have a couple of other visuals of real funds at the Community Foundation. But this represents, a 20-year timeline of a gift of about $500,000 and shows the market growth and the grants over time. So you can see, that first year, there's not a return. And this, after 5 years, you're starting to see those returns, but it doesn't necessarily equate to the initial investment that you made. However, over a 20-year span, all of a sudden you're looking at, grants out that equate to larger than the initial gift and almost double the principal of your initial investment. So this is where that magic ingredient of time is really powerful. And, then you can start to extrapolate from there. What does 30 years look like? What does 50 years look like? What does 100 years look like when none of us are here and you don't have the same board or staff, and maybe, things have changed with your organization, but you still have funding that you can rely on that's making an incredible difference in the long term. Timing also matters, and we'll see an example of this here in a little bit, but the stock market is unpredictable and does not always go up. We were recently in a downward phase, so we all kind of felt that heat a little bit. And, no one knows how long those ups and downs are going to last. So the last significant example, that we'll demonstrate today is from 2008, and we've got an example for that. But while this particular slide is a visual representation of the value of time and the power of the endowment, the next slide actually give you those real numbers. So just wanted to provide that as an initial visual component. This is an example of a true fund at the Community Foundation, and we'll have both a visual representation and a numbers representation to kind of get those different right brain, left brain folks. But this fund was created in 1995 with an initial gift of $1,000. And, the organization itself made contributions to that fund later. So you can see the brown line demonstrates the total contributions. And the reason it's flat is because all of their contributions were made prior to 1999 when we start this graph here. So a total of $236,800 is what went into this fund. And that's pretty average at the Community Foundation, kind of in that range. So we chose these examples to kind of provide you those in-betweens for funds. But what gets really cool about this is the green line represents the total assets at, each year end, and the orange line represents the cumulative grants over time. So this is where it's really cool because it actually demonstrates the methodology that Sarah will get into a little bit for our investment purposes of, valuing that at 20 rolling quarters over a 5-year period to really smooth out those ups and downs in the market so that we're able to consistently grant over time and that our grants grow over time. So this is just a good representation because it shows, again, the cumulative grants over a 20-year period, almost 20-year period, exceed the initial investment that the organization made, as do the total assets at year end. So really demonstrating that magic ingredient, the value of time, the value of discipline that this organization has held to. And I do want to call out some specific things for this fund. You can read it at the bottom, but the fund, though it was established in 1995, we're only showing since 1999 when they started taking grant distributions from their fund. And our digital tracking changed in 2005. So it's not like their assets went from 0 to that number. That's just when we have digital information that we were able to pull. So, and for the numbers-based folks, this is another fund at the Community Foundation that was started in 2007. And the reason that we really wanted to show this fund is because in 2007, December 2007 was a real super fun time. And then January 2008 hit and it became a real bummer real fast. So this fund, went down, in the unrealized losses or gains over 25%. So you can see we've highlighted that 2008 number, a significant decrease. And yet, when you bring in, again, that magic ingredient of time, it all kind of works out in the end. So this fund, it's horrible timing overall when it started, but because these funds are invested for the long term, the current result is pretty great. In over 15 years now of returns and grants out, you can see that the fund balance, again, exceeds the amount of the original gift, and the grants out are over $100,000. So this is a real fund, again, at the Community Foundation with real numbers. And I do want to draw some attention to these numbers over here. They're slightly different than the numbers that we showed on the other slide. Here we're showing the total net earnings of this fund. So you can see that the net earnings, less fees, less distributions, is still quite high. The total supporting fee and then the cumulative distributions, again, over time is significant. And we only have 15 years of data on this fund. So not quite as long as the previous fund, but it does demonstrate that magic ingredient. So maybe you're a visual person or maybe you're a numbers person, but hopefully the last 2 slides have really illustrated the power of endowment to fuel your work over time. I'm going to hand it off to Sarah again. Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks. I just wanted to mention for the group that we will stop for questions in 2 or 3 slides. So now is a great time to populate those questions you might have in the Q&A. And that way we can get to them when we get to our questions slide. So, okay, moving on. Obviously we're a little biased for endowments, as for many of the reasons that you've heard us mention already, but we would be remiss to not mention that there are some cons to having an endowment, and it just depends. We're firm believers that endowments are right for every organization. We also believe that they may not always be right for an organization at each time, like at the same time. So there may be a time in your organization's lifespan that you feel like, yeah, now is really the best time for us to do that. But just to kind of reiterate some of the pros that we've already, stated, is that you just have this endowment that creates consistent and flexible, ideally flexible funding for your organization to carry out your work. And it just also helps diversify your funding. in a way so that you may be able to really innovate and grow in ways that you might not otherwise be able to do if you have funding tied to specific programs or services, things like that. And one really important thing about endowments is it really honors the intent of the board that voted now's the right time. We want to start this permanent long-term fund for our organization. And an endowment does that. It makes sure that that fund exists in perpetuity to benefit your organization. And with that, really demonstrates outwardly the organization's commitment to stability and sustainability. And that in turn pairs really well with your donors, because they're seeing this commitment to your work and your mission and being around for the long term. And so having an endowment presents a wonderful opportunity for donors to leave a legacy through gifts of estate or another type of charitable gift that can support your work in perpetuity. And so it gives another opportunity to talk to your donors about ways they can really support your work in a meaningful way. Some of the cons, can certainly be what we discussed earlier, is that there is a portion of funding that is, restricted from your use. You cannot access it. And so that principal piece is really important. So if you're in you have an opportunity to buy a building and you need $100,000 to be able to add to whatever you've saved up to do that, the endowment is not going to be the resource that you can use to access that funding. And so, if that is kind of a situation that your organization might be in, it may be better right now to look at building up reserve funds or emergency funds and then think about an endowment down the line. And we talked a little bit about this already, but endowments are just like any other invested fund. They react to the market, including gains, which is wonderful, and losses, which is less wonderful. But that disciplined investment approach and that secret or magic ingredient, time, help level out the volatility in the market. And because the time horizon is theoretically forever, you've got a long time to be able to balance that out. Also, if you're deciding to manage an endowment or an invested fund sort of in-house, it requires significant time, money, and expertise to make sure that the fund is being managed appropriately, aligned with the MIFA, that you have the correct policies in place, that your board understands the legal and fiduciary responsibilities that they are responsible for when managing that fund themselves. So there's, some major legal considerations that you would want to go through when thinking about an endowment. And this brings us to sort of the next slide. And I feel like it's really important for us to distinguish here that the community foundation isn't the only option for endowments. And the one thing that's a little bit different is we have a distinction between a true endowment or a fund acting as an endowment. And there are a few primary differences, but really the biggest one is that a true endowment is governed by a gift document or a gift instrument. And it details how the fund will be expended. And this legal document must be followed with guidance from UPMIFA, the investment and spending policies. And so that is one really key feature of a true endowment as opposed to a fund that is acting as endowment. And at the Community Foundation, our model is the true endowment model. We have gift agreements for each endowed fund. The funds in the principal cannot be withdrawn or even borrowed from, and the purpose of the fund cannot be changed. So these are things that, really truly safeguard that, not only that board intent, but the intent for your organization that this fund will exist in perpetuity for your organization. And you can, of course, always set up funds at another institution, and that would be a fund where your board designates this fund to act as an endowment. So very likely your investment team would help you establish your own investment policy, spending policy, usage policy, but at its core, it is not a true endowment because even with all those policies in place, a future board could come along and say, you know what, we actually do need all of this money because we are embarking, on a major expansion plan. And so we're going to vote with, 2/3 vote of our board to eliminate these policies and withdraw the full fund. So that's just an important distinction because that actually could not happen at the community foundation, but could be a strategy that a group, employs with another investment partner. Another difference, of course, that we kind of talked a little bit about is the spending payout. So the community foundations is at set at 4%, and that is consistent. You can rely on that every single year. You can budget for it. It may change within just a few dollars and cents, but ultimately you'll have a good estimate of what you can expect year over year. And as Jerica showed in some of the previous slides, that payout will grow over time. And which is a significant benefit to you all as an organization. Whereas another fund acting as an endowment is sort of subject to a market payout unless you have a really specific spending policy like the one we have here at the Community Foundation. So in years where the market is up 20%, that is terrific, and you may be able to withdraw the full 20% in earnings off of your fund. But in years where it's negative 15%, you would receive no payout from your fund at that time. So again, just something to consider in terms of, are you looking for a really consistent payout, or are you trying to maximize the payouts that you're receiving? And the Community Foundation really is an expert in nonprofits. As a nonprofit ourselves, we really try to not only be a partner in philanthropy across Wyoming to our nonprofit partners, but we understand nonprofits not only from the funding model standpoint, but from governance, from fundraising, from just operational challenges in our state. So we at the Community Foundation Endowments here, we kind of take the lens of being, a nonprofit expert, and this is one tool that helps nonprofits really thrive and raises, the quality of services across our entire state. And likewise, or alternatively, your invested funds would really be held with someone that is an expert in, financial matters or investment matters, investment funds, but they may not necessarily be well versed in nonprofits in terms of policies, strategies, or applicable laws. And the last thing, we'll touch a little bit more on it, and we keep saying we want to be your partner in philanthropy, and we'll kind of get into the specifics of what that looks like. But at the Community Foundation, we will provide additional support to your organization in a variety of ways. And that is not something you're as likely to have at another institution, simply because they are not in the nonprofit space as much as the Community Foundation is. So you might have a lot of access and education and information around like financial matters or investment matters, and maybe less support in terms of board governance training or fundraising training, or assistance in like accepting a gift of real estate and liquidating that to put it into your fund. That, that's not something that other organizations are likely to help you with. So those are just kind of there's neither one is better nor worse. It's just what is right for your organization. If it's really the true endowment role, we really feel like the Community Foundation adds a lot of value to that space. But if it's a fund acting as an endowment that you want to maintain that long-term opportunity to withdraw all the funds if you need it, then that might be the best route for you. So with that, we've covered a lot of information about endowments just in general. And as I mentioned, we'll talk specifically about endowments at the Community Foundation, but just wondering what questions we can answer for you at the moment.
Misty, Madeline, do we have anything in the chat box that's come up? I don't have it pulled up.
Yes, you have a question from Gary Headland. Aside from your pros and cons slide, what represents a good quantitative scorecard to help determine if an endowment is right for a long-term care facility?
That's an excellent question. And I think I don't mean to be so vague, but I think it depends. And it really depends on a variety of things, like where is your organization at the moment? Do you have a strong annual donor base? Do you have enough donors to support an endowment campaign? Do you have, or are you really in the position where you're really operating hand to mouth mostly? And it just depends. And we are happy to kind of talk through with you specifically, like what what opportunities exist for your organization that help you feel like now is a great time for an endowment, and we can kind of walk through that and determine whether or not it's the right time. I wouldn't say that there is a quantitative scorecard in terms of being like, okay, now we're ready. It is really both an organizational leadership and staff collective decision to say, yeah, we feel like our operating is very sound. You never know what's going to happen in the future, but if you're feeling really well established in that way, and you maybe have some reserve funds, or you have a donor who's interested in doing something different or more, those would maybe be some trigger points that might make it a good time for you to have the endowment discussion. And like I said, we're happy to visit with you specifically about your organization and kind of walk through if now's the right time or not.
Okay, well, we had a couple of other questions in regards to our fees and the minimum to start a fund. I'm not going to answer those yet because we're going to get to that right now. So if there are no other questions, we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and we'll just keep on keeping on. Okay, so how do endowments at WYCF work? So endowments at the Community Foundation are very simple and straightforward. Our minimum to start a fund is only $10,000. And we have designated this amount because we really want to be accessible to all sizes, all types of nonprofits, and really provide, the benefits of an endowment, no matter where you are in your nonprofit life cycle. That being said, as Sarah mentioned, there are good times and bad times. There are appropriate times. It's something that you have to figure out for your organization whether or not it's the right time to start an endowment. And we are big believers that all organizations need them. It's just determining when is the best time for your organization. So the process starts by creating a gift document. Essentially, you reach out to Wyoming Community Foundation staff, who would be me or Sarah, more than likely. So we wanted to represent the folks that you would be working with, potentially to start a fund at the Community Foundation. At that point, you designate your initial gift to establish the fund, and this could be a gift from your organization. You might have a donor who is really interested in supporting your work in perpetuity, who wants to start an endowment on your behalf, and we have that as an option. And then, determining how you would like to use the distribution. And you do have the option to have a broader designation or more specific. We really encourage organizations that work with us to keep it as unrestricted as possible, because it really should be funding that you can use for whatever your organization needs at the time. Okay, so funds established at the Community Foundation must be invested for a full calendar year. So for instance, if you were to call us tomorrow and start a fund right now, you would not be able to actually take a distribution until 2026. So that means the half of year this year that it would be invested, all of 2025, and then you would receive your first distribution in 2026. So, especially if you're starting a fund in January, that can feel a little bit tricky because it's almost invested for 2 calendar years, but that's really to ensure that there's enough in your account to make those distributions, in your fund to make those distributions. So that's part of our methodology. We do issue, as Sarah has mentioned, that 4% annual distribution, and our focus is on sustainability, on making sure that we're able to provide that amount every year so you can count on it in your budget. You can estimate based on previous distributions how much to expect, something you can really rely on. And that distribution is automatic. You don't have to do anything for it. There's no application, there's no final report, there's no additional administrative work on your end. Our wonderful CFO Misty puts all of those fund statements together and sends out a check and, wishes you well. So that's something that you kind of save it and forget it, and then you get the distribution, which can be really helpful. As we've mentioned, our distributions are calculated over 5 years or 20 rolling quarters. And the reason we use quarters is to smooth out those dips in the market. As you know, it's volatile, there are ups and downs. So by taking those amounts on a quarterly basis, we're able to kind of smooth those out. If you remember that visual component we included for one of our funds, you could see that the market was all over the place while cumulative grant making continued on an pretty smooth upward trajectory. So one of the things we like to say is let you know is that your fund can be reinvested. So say you do want to start endowment and you see the value of it, you don't have a ton to put in it at this time, but you know that you want this tool in the future. We have had organizations establish an endowment, and rather than take the annual distribution, they reinvest it in their fund for growth. And we'll get a little bit into our fees here in a second. Sarah will talk about that, but just because your fund, we're distributing 4% and we have our fees, doesn't mean that the return isn't much higher. So if the return is higher, it is being reinvested in your fund for growth over time. Okay, and then, this is where we feel like we're really valuable, is we manage the administrative details so that you don't have to. You're included in our audit. You're included under the policies that Sarah talked about. So you don't have to create an investment policy. You don't have to create a spending policy. You still need some idea of a usage policy, but those are things that we have already in place that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We also have experts on our board. So our board actually, doesn't manage the fund, but holds the fiduciary responsibility for those funds. So as I imagine, many of you have volunteer boards. You're already asking them to volunteer, and you're asking them to make a contribution, and you're asking them to attend board meetings, and your board members show up time and time again to support your work because they love it, right? But they don't necessarily have the investment expertise, or if they do, they don't necessarily recognize that they are on the hook for those funds. So our boards manage the fiduciary responsibility for those funds, which is a huge burden off of your board members and really allows them to focus on your work, the work that they love. So I lost my place. Let's see. So taking the pressure off of your board and removing the liability for those funds from your board members. Okay, so by working with the Community Foundation and establishing a fund with us, it really enables you to focus on your mission work. You don't have to worry about, filing a 990 for your fund. You don't have to worry about, audits. You don't have to worry about any of those things because we're managing that. We're providing those additional services that we'll talk about, and you're included under our investment methodology. And we believe that you're in really great company because as we've mentioned, we hold over 140 endowed funds at the Community Foundation, and we've really worked to build a reputation as a partner in philanthropy and as a trusted resource for the nonprofit community. Okay, so I'm going to toss it over to Sarah to talk about our investment.
Thanks, Jerica. So the Community Foundation wants to be really clear here. We ourselves are not pretending to be an investment manager. We are not that. We can provide a lot of other support, and we work with a really wonderful investment team the Mason Investment Advisory Services, and we have worked with them since 2010. And just a little bit about them, they manage all of our 200 million in assets are managed with Mason, and they have collectively in their organization of all the clients that over 800 clients, they manage more than 11 billion with a B assets for their clients, and about 1/4 of their overall assets under management are like roughly 3 billion that are for community foundations specifically. They work with 45 community foundations just like us. And so they're really well versed in this space and very knowledgeable about the types of strategies and methodologies that community foundations are striving for. So they're really some experts in the field there. And as I mentioned, we've been with them for a very long time. And our investment committee, part of their responsibility is to continuously review and monitor Mason and ensure that they're meeting our goals for all of our 400 plus funds and all of the assets under management, to ensure that we are meeting, the goals that the investment committee has outlined, our investment policy statement and our spending policy, and that we can do that forever. That's the goal. And so here we're just showing you the year-over-year performance for our long-term fund, which is where our endowed funds are managed. And this is just the last 5 years. You can see each individual year's return, and then you can see sort of the 5-year average of our portfolio, which is net of fees. And so we've got a portfolio return of 10.9%. And that is exactly what Jericho is talking about in terms of any growth over that distribution amount allows your fund to grow. And that's exactly the model that we have here, so that this fund can grow over time and provide additional support to your organization. And then I just wanted to mention, we do, of course, have a supporting fee as part of our work for, managing the administrative details on the fund. And the supporting fee it is inclusive of investment fees, and it's inclusive of the fee that the community foundation charges to do our work. And that's less than 2%. Currently, funds under $1 million are averaging 1.75% for their fund for the management. And that, again, is inclusive of the community foundation's administrative fee and our investment fee. And then, not to belabor the point, I know Jericho already just went over this 4% payout and how that's calculated, but again, just to reiterate that even though this chart here is showing you the yearly returns, the benefit to you as fund holders in the way that we calculate that 4% payout is because we're taking the fund balance at the end of every quarter. So in a given year, you could have any quarters that are negative themselves, or any quarters that are positive, even if the annual return is plus or minus. And so that just, again, helps to even out that volatility and give you all the opportunity to really estimate what your annual payout is going to be. And then last but not least, that supporting fee does allow us to do some of these other things that we talked about, and we will talk about in the upcoming slides, but in the ways that the community foundation can also support your organization beyond just being the place where your endowment is established and invested. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jerica.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so we're just going to reiterate a couple of points. There's some new information on this slide, but these are, again, if you were looking for a reason not to establish an endowment, you came to the wrong place, because we have all drank the Kool-Aid and are very strong believers in endowment. So we just want to reiterate some of the benefits that this brings, not only to your organization, but also to your donors. So as Sarah mentioned a little bit earlier, an endowment really provides an opportunity and a space for your donors to support your work in perpetuity through estate gifts. So even if you haven't established a planned giving program, you may have been around long enough that you have donors who are starting to consider some legacy gifts, some afterlife gifts that really care about your work and want to continue to support it. So having an endowment is a really great space is a great vehicle for those estate gifts or unusual types of gifts. And we'll get a little bit into that later, but a lot of your donors may not be cash rich, but they may have assets that could really benefit your work that we can accept on your behalf. So that Sarah will talk about that in a little bit. So I do like to provide kind of an example of this just to break it down. So I'm sure, let's use the example of an annual donor who's giving about $1,000 a year. And hopefully you can picture this person in your mind. You can think of, the interactions that you've had with them. So if this person were to pass away and leave a gift of just $20,000 to your endowment, that would continue their $1,000 a year for forever. So this is just a way to illustrate, the impact that one donor can have on your organization for the long term, even if it's not a large gift. So endowments, it doesn't necessarily matter the size. It's really the intention, I think, that it's so important. Okay. So also the confidence of donor intent. We've talked a lot about the confidence of board intent, but it's also important to have confidence of donor intent, really helping your donors to understand that you are around for the long haul, that your work is going to continue, that you're going to continue to support your constituency and be there for the long haul by having an endowment. That really demonstrates to donors that you're in it and you're going to continue to be in it and that they can feel confident in supporting that work for the long term. We've talked about stability. This is also true for donors, stability for their favorite nonprofit, security, and that the corpus or the principal is never going to be invaded and that the endowment will exist in perpetuity. And then we want to talk briefly about variance, power, or dissolution. So, if in 100 years, when all of us are gone and your nonprofit, for some reason, whether, you're working on a specific disease that has been cured, or we've, found the solution for homelessness, or I'm going to look at it from a positive note. Hopefully your nonprofit is no longer in existence because you've solved the problem that you're working on. The Community Foundation Board will exercise variance power. And that's where we work with you using your articles of dissolution to find the best place to direct endowed funds for an organization that most closely meets the specifications of the endowment that you established or the closest location. So let's say we cured cancer in Wyoming, but Colorado hasn't quite figured it out yet. We would be able to dissolve your organization and distribute those funds to a closely related organization location-wise, or something else in the state that was working on that work. Okay, so it goes both ways too. So there are federal laws governing endowed funds and community foundations. So if the community foundation for the Wyoming Community Foundation were forever, whatever reason, to dissolve, we would work with you to find another place for these endowed funds to live so that you could continue to rely on that distribution and rely on those endowed funds. All right, so we've talked a little bit more about the organizational benefits. We bring the expertise. Your board, has confidence that this endowment that they establish is going to exist in perpetuity and that a board 50 years down the road isn't going to come in and dissolve the policies that they had created and then take all the money out and buy a building. We're really holding to that board intent for you as well, providing the sustainability of your organization, providing space for growth so that you can keep a laser focus on your mission work and really focus on the work that is benefiting your community and grow your organization as appropriate to meet those needs, rather than being pulled in a ton of different directions by having to become experts in investments or experts in endowments. And then you're, of course, included under our governance policies. So again, those include the investment policy, the usage policy, the spending policy, so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel and create those. And you're protected by Mason, who is our experts in investments and the organization that we rely on to ensure that you're getting the best return for your organization. Okay, and then one other point, again, the fiduciary responsibility lies with our board. So taking that burden and that liability off of your board. And I know that we've really stressed that point, but it is such a valuable thing to remember, because you are already asking so much of we all are asking so much of our board members. So being able to remove that burden from their plate is really essential. Okay, and then we're going to talk a little bit about our gift acceptance policy and some of the things that we can do on your behalf. And I'm going to toss it over to Sarah for that.
This is one of the benefits we feel like is so valuable to nonprofits that have funds with us, because in a state like Wyoming, we have a lot of wealth in the state. However, most of it is not in cash. And so that presents a really unique opportunity where donors have an interest in contributing an asset to charity, but it requires a little bit of time, resources, expertise in order to know how to do that. And as your partner in philanthropy, the Community Foundation can help with that. And that is one thing that we have done with a lot of organizations throughout the years, is help facilitate a gift to their endowed fund with one of their donors that they're already working closely with. And it just might be something that it's just like, you know what, we really are not in a place as an organization to accept a gift of real property, to liquidate, you know, the contents of the home, to then liquidate the property itself, to work with a real estate agent, to do all of these things, because that it requires a lot of time and resources. That is something that the Community Foundation can assist with. So that is something we feel like is very valuable to our nonprofit partners. And you would be shocked at the number of things that we get inquiries about in terms of appreciated valuables, appreciated, you know, certainly stock and wire transfers, appreciated property. We've done things with mineral rights and royalties. We've done things with surface rights. We've done all kinds of things. And so I just want to reiterate that, like, you all as our partners with an agency fund at the Community Foundation, we can be, I think, a real value add in this way, and are happy to either work with you on the front end as you're working with your donor and making sure that we have everything set up in the appropriate manner so that the process is as seamless as possible. Or certainly there, you know, they say that for every planned gift you know about, there are 3 you don't. So one day you might receive a phone call that's like, hi, you are now the proud owner of a property in, you know, Sheridan County. Well, okay, now what do we do? So at that point, we would love to work with you and figure out the best and most efficient way to liquidate that asset and provide the maximum charitable benefit to your organization. So.
Okay, and I know that we are at the top of the hour, so I just want to say we've got just a couple more things to talk to y'all about, and try to be really respectful of your time if you can bear with us for a little bit longer. And I know Sarah said we wouldn't belabor the point, but I'm going to belabor the point in that we really feel like we are partners in philanthropy. And, you know, Sarah talked about our supporting fee and being inclusive of our investment fee. We feel like those additional services that we provide to our nonprofit partners, from our gift acceptance policy to what I'm going to talk about, really help us help you and help us support you in a way that you might not get in other partnerships. So we really want to be here for you. And a couple of the ways that we've tried to do that is by creating an agency fund toolkit that is on our website. It's password protected, so you can only access it as an agency fund. It's real super secret, top secret stuff, but I'm going to tell you exactly what's in it. And then I'm going to show you on our website exactly what's in it. But essentially, we try and provide, some tools for you around language of giving. I thought that was a link. Letter templates that you can send out to your constituents, that you can send out to your donors. Branded guides around planned giving. So if you're starting to talk to someone about what it looks like to make a distribution from their retirement account to your endowment, or to establish an estate fund, or something like that, we can help provide some of those resources and can also be there to support your donor in really understanding those. We provide images for social media and other communications that you can include, on your website or on, in your newsletters, whatever the case may be. So we have our little agency fund toolkit. It's right under here under partners, agency endowed funds. Can you guys see this?
Yeah? Yes.
Okay, great. Endowment toolkit. And like I said, it is password protected. I can remember the password. We just try and provide you some of those extra resources to help you really be successful in growing your endowment, if that's something that's of interest to you. So language of giving, letter templates, you can see we have some of these branded guides here that we provide to you, social media images, things that you can use on your website, ways to reference your organization. And we also include all of our recordings. So we have some recordings from the nonprofit conference from 2022. We'll probably have presentations from our staff for the 2024 conference. We'll also have, an annual update with Mason Investment Advisory Services that's included on this. We're really trying to provide you some of those tools to help grow your endowment and really understand your endowment. We also do some fundraising on your behalf. And I want to make this clear, we're not actively out fundraising for our agency fund partners, because we are fundraising for the whole state and fundraising for our grant making. But we've tried to incorporate some different elements in what we're already doing to really spotlight the funds that we hold. The first one is a partnership with Free Will. So Free Will is a free space will planning service that's free to the donor, and it really highlights charitable opportunities for estate gifts or gifts in someone's will. And one of the giving options that we've provided is a Give Where You Live, and it lists all of our agency funds. And we have actually received some estate gifts for agency funds that we hold at the Community Foundation. And this is something that you can promote to your donor base. This is something you can promote to the people who support you, to really encourage them to consider leaving a gift of estate to your organization that, doesn't require you to create a whole planned giving program. The other thing is that we do fundraise for our own operations, and we use a letter mailed appeal just like every other organization. We used to do 2 a year, and we found that rather than doing 2 a year for ourselves, what we really would like to do is repurpose one of those to, again, spotlight our agency funds. So we have repurposed last year, and this year it'll be coming in your mailboxes in May, where we're actually highlighting all of the agency funds that we have, giving a list of those funds by county so that our donor base, the people who receive our communications, know about opportunities to give to organizations in their community that they might not even have known are included in their area. So something else that we've done. The last thing that I'd like to talk about, and this is something new this year, is we've worked closely with Colorado Planned Giving Roundtable out of Colorado, and they really are serving Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, providing planned giving expertise. They do a summer symposium. They do lots of in-person and virtual educational pieces around some of those estate topics. So we just attended one about mineral rights and how to address those in your policies, and talking about creating a planned giving program or planned giving 101, or the basics of those of talking about estate gifts, how to approach millennials about estate gifts, which, there's just like a lot of different topics that they provide that, rather than reinventing the wheel and providing additionally through the Community Foundation, we are encouraging, or are providing a membership to CPGR for 1 year to any nonprofit who establishes an agency fund with us in 2024. So that's something that we're hopeful we can continue to offer and really provide not only the mechanism for those gifts and where they go, but also the training to how to talk about it, how to engage with your donors, how to really understand, the ways that you can grow that endowment. And then lastly, we're going to toot our own horns a little bit and talk about our staff. Our staff are Wyoming people living in Wyoming. We have a staff of 21, as I mentioned, and we are here to support our nonprofit organizations. And one of the ways that we do that is help have some of those complex conversations with your donors. So if you are a food or an art museum and you have a really wonderful Wyoming cowboy who loves your work and wants to donate a herd of cattle to you that you can't put on some sort of live art display in your museum, we can meet with them and with you to talk about how that gift can be liquidated into your endowment. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but essentially we can be there to have some of those. It could happen in Wyoming. It could happen. We really are there to support you and be your partner in philanthropy to help your donors understand how to best support your work in a way that's also going to benefit them, either through estate giving or through tax planning or whatever the case may be. So we want to really tout that and say that our staff is here to support you. And I think that's about it for us.
Yeah, that wraps up, our formal presentation. I know we're a little bit at time, but and we do have at least one question that we will absolutely get to. I just wanted to provide a few quick reminders that the webinar is recorded. We'll be sending it out in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. Please take a minute to take our survey. We really do appreciate your feedback and hope that webinars like this and other topics are useful to you. And we'll also be announcing the winners of the grant giveaways. So keep that in your, keep your eyes peeled for that in that email as well. And okay, finally, we've got our last, questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. One of the questions that we received were, can nonprofits have endowment funds at the community foundation and continue receiving grants for programs? And the answer is yes. Having an endowed fund does not eliminate you from potentially receiving a grant in the competitive process. So,
and oftentimes nonprofits come to us as grantees, or come to us for an endowment and then learn about our grant making services. So they are not mutually exclusive at all. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your time. Reach out to us anytime.
Thank you.